With you all again. These things are a delight. You see this little thing that looks somewhat like Alexa. It's actually a new video thing, so this will be live streamed on Facebook. So if you want to come back and revisit it, or if you want to send it on to friends, that would be a good thing. It's really a joy for me to be here with Vanessa today. I've mostly seen her playing the guitar in various musical things, but it turns out she does other things as well, and she's pretty good at them. You probably know a bit about her from the preparation, but just a couple of highlights. She's the executive director of the YWCA Madison. She's been in that role since 2017. She started working at the Y in 2014. She grew up in Madison, got her BA in Sociology at UW-Madison in 2003. Longtime member and volunteer at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where she also served as the executive assistant to the pastor for 9 years. And she's also known as DJ Ace, mixes music around town at parties and events like Dane Dances, and plays the bass guitar for the music ministry at Mount Zion. And growing up in Madison, she has parents who are with us today, Candace and Chuck McDowell, who are also really significant figures in the life of Madison, and particularly the life of UW. They were from Milwaukee. Chuck, I know you did. I think maybe you were involved in the open housing marches in the 60s there, and sort of came out of that part of the civil rights movement. Both are UW-Madison grads. Candace was the founder and director, and now is assistant dean emeritus at the UW Multicultural Center. And Chuck is retired as VP of Human Resources at Madison College, past president of the Wisconsin Association of Public Sector Employees, former member of the Equal Opportunities Commission, past president of the Madison Alumnae Association. I say all this because there seems to be a heritage that is in Vanessa's life. So I'd kind of like to start there. You don't need to tell all the stories about your parents. But how did your folks' life and work and attitudes shape you as you were growing up?
Yeah, well, I did bring some pictures. Okay, so this is kind of where it all started, right? I really grew up in a household where I saw things modeled, and I saw things, representation matters, right? And so for me, you can keep playing the childhood ones. My parents were really, that's my afro, yeah.
Great song.
My parents were really essential in instilling in me, the importance of hard work, and the importance of being a leader. And so my parents really, they're my role models, if you will. And so one thing that I was remembering this morning that on one night of the week when I was growing up, my parents were teaching me two vital lessons that I carry with me even today. And it was Tuesday nights. Tuesday nights I would either go with my mom to choir rehearsal, or I'd go with my dad to his reffing. He would ref basketball games. And so for going to choir rehearsal, it was like my mom was helping to instill my faith as a little child. I would hear these songs, and to this day, these songs get me through when I'm, going through something. And then on the other side, my dad was taking me to basketball games, and I'm running around, playing, dribbling with the ball, and halftime was my favorite time because I could shoot around. But he was teaching me the importance of a side hustle. I didn't know it at the time, right? Until I thought about it. I was like, my dad, taught me about having a side hustle, which to me was another way to make sure that he was taking care of our family and making sure the ends meet. And so for me, those are two things that I still live with, that my faith is very important to me in my life, as well as, so is my side hustle. As you heard, I'm a DJ, and I play the bass, so yeah.
It all fits together.
It all fits together.
And so growing up as a kid of the church, effectively, what was that like?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, my church family is still, we're like a family. And so You know, even as a child, you know, being in the back with the rest of the kids, and, you know, we're supposed to be paying attention, but we're playing a game called MASH, you know, things like that, or just having the opportunity to grow up in the church, which I feel like has been lost a lot in the community. When I look and work with people now, some of them have no touch with the church at all, or never have. And for me, that has been essential to my life and growing up. And so I'm appreciative that my parents, in a sense, drugged me to church, right? And I was at choir, so I was at, I participated in Bible study, you know, I was in the choir, all these things that for me made my community and who my community still stands today.
So a lot of times when folks go off to college and see a broader world and ask a lot of questions, faith sort of recedes for them for a while, but I don't think that happened with you.
No.
And why not? What
it was interesting. So I went to UW-Madison, and I stayed active in the church while I was in school, to the point where some of my church members were saying, "Why are you here?" You know, like, you should be living the college life and all this stuff. And I was like, you know, this is where I belong. And I've always felt a calling to the church and serving the people of the church and the people of the city. So for me, going to college didn't make anything different. It just meant that I now had to catch the bus down to church instead of maybe riding with my parents. So, or driving,
So just jumping ahead, and we'll kind of loop back in a minute, but so you worked at the church for 9 years as the executive assistant to the pastor. How did that prepare you for the job of being head of the YWCA?
Oh, yeah, I have this saying that I say that if you can work with church people, you can work with anybody. Okay, amen to that, right? And so I really felt like my experience working at Mount Zion really prepared me in the sense of knowing where resources were to connect people in the city, but also built my leadership skills. I do believe that my leadership skills were developed in the church. And I tell the story of even when I was younger, I was like the choir president at maybe the age of 8 and 9, which at that time I had no idea what I was doing, right? Or
but the choir survived something.
Right, the choir's still going, so I didn't do too bad. And I was the youth ministry leader co-director for almost 10 years. And so leading Bible study and preparing lessons and praying to make sure that what we were teaching was in line with what God's will. So I learned a lot of things just being in different leadership roles in the church. And then to be the executive assistant to the pastor was just kind of the next level for me to be able to continue to develop my leadership skills and also be what I call a servant first. I do think that as a leader, you have to learn how to follow first. And once you learn how to follow, then you can lead. So.
And as you were thinking about, what do I want to do when I go to college? What field do I want to pursue? Then what kinds of jobs do I want to look for? Can you talk a little bit about where your faith came into play as you were trying to make those decisions? Was it something that you measured your decisions against?
Well, when I was in college here at UW-Madison, I worked for the chancellor's office. And at that time, there were 2 floors. The floor that I worked on was a downstairs floor, and then there was an upstairs floor. And downstairs were people of color, basically, right? Which is kind of an interesting concept, right? And students of color worked downstairs. And then upstairs was all white staff. And the students that worked there were all white. And so, of course, clearly I'm like thinking something is quite strange about this. And at one point, we were told, the students downstairs, the students of color downstairs, that our positions were being eliminated. And, you know, it's like, okay, you know, thinking nothing of it, just thinking this is something that happens. And it was my responsibility to help train the white students upstairs, what we were doing downstairs. So there's a point where I was training one of the white students upstairs, and we were walking across the street to go get the mail or something. And she tells me that they just hired her sister. And I'm like, how is that possible? Right? We were getting let go, but you just hired your sister. And so I'm just letting her talk. And she says, yeah, they said they want to keep it in the family. And that moment incited something on the inside of me that I didn't know I had. And from that point, my mom can attest, I was livid, right? And I happened to be, she was working on campus as the director of the Multicultural Center at the time, and they were having a meeting with the vice chancellor at the time, and he was—
What good timing.
Right. I was like, okay, Lord. And we were having this meeting, and they were asking students, do you have any feedback? My hand went straight up, right? So I'm telling about my experience, and his name was Paul Barrows at the time, and you know, as an African-American man, he was just totally appalled that this was happening. He was like, what? And so, to make the long story short, it was a big hoopla, and I ended up getting hired upstairs. Well, right? It was like, yeah, but I was also the only one in that setting. A token, there you go, where it was very isolating, and I could feel the tension that I had caused ruckus, and here's that girl that spoke up and said something. So I didn't stay there long, but what that did for me was, it was a time where I needed to declare a major, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but that experience defined it for me. So then that's when I went into sociology and started thinking about people and systems and how does this whole thing work. And from there, I realized that I really have a passion to serve the unnoticed, serve the underserved, to make those that are voiceless have a voice. All of that got defined in that moment, and I said, I need to do something that has to do with that.
Yeah, which there's some echoes to what you might have been hearing in church around that, serving the underserved and giving voice to the voiceless and such things. When we were talking to get ready for this, you talked about when there was the opportunity to apply for the director's job at the YW, you really had to kind of go back in yourself again and figure out, is this the right thing? Can you talk a little bit about what you did during that process of deciding?
Sure. I had been the interim CEO for about 6 months. And how that happened was my predecessor, Rachel, shared with me that she was leaving. She was moving to Seattle, and she wanted me to take on the interim role. And so, of course, I was like, whoa, I had no thoughts about being the CEO at all at the time. And so, I prayed about it and really felt like, okay, God, I think you're saying yes to this, so I did it. And then it came time 6 months later where, it was the search. So they did a nationwide search, and I was struggling whether I wanted to actually put my hat in the ring to be the actual CEO. And so there were two, I would say, defining moments, because I was praying, fasting, trying to figure out direction here, because I knew that I would be the first in 108 years to be a person of color leading this organization. So the weight of that was heavy, and I knew it was going to be heavy, right? And then for our mission to be eliminating racism and empowering women, that's also a heavy weight to carry. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, Lord, what are you saying? Am I supposed to do this? Am I not? And two things happened. I was reading Esther at the time, and there's this part in Esther chapter 4, verse 14. And, this is a story of sort of Mordecai and Esther, and basically there was this hit out on the Jews, and Mordecai is asking Esther to go before the king and basically plead the case to not kill the Jews, right? And this is Queen Esther. And this scripture stuck out to me, right? It rung like, how when God speaks, there's no doubt, right? And it simply says, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Mm. And I thought, such a time as this. Okay, Lord. I guess that's clear, right? And so there was that moment. And then I, as I do often, I go to my parents' house to, seek their guidance and wisdom. And I remember going over there and, we're in the living room talking, and I was sharing with them my struggle of choosing, what do I do in this situation? And we start talking, and before you know it, we see a pattern, right? So my mom starts to tell me about when she initially wanted or was the interim director of the Multicultural Center. She was 36 years old. I was 36 years old as I was the interim CEO of the YWCA. She then started talking about how she was scared to death about whether to be the director or not. And, that's when my father chimes in and said, "I told her to go for it," And that moment, I realized this is a God moment. How is it that me and my mom are in the same position at the same time in life? I'm 36 years old, having the same challenge she had when she was 36 years old. And she became the director of the Multicultural Center and soared and became a trailblazer. And God was saying, "I have the same assignment on your life. So I need you to go forward, scared or not, do it scared, and you do the same thing." And so those two moments for me were defining to hear God clearly say, "I've called you to this, to such a time as this."
And clearly the hiring committee saw something there as well.
Well, I like to think God supersedes the hiring committee. So, he used them, but at the end of the day, right, at the end of the day, God's will is going to be done. So
there we go. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So the YW has its roots going way back into the 1800s, but it really kind of incorporated nationally, I think, in 1907, and the YWCA Madison came into existence in 1908, so roots going way back. It was long the Young Women's Christians Association, so there were real religious roots. A couple years ago, it became the YWCA to sort of serve more broadly. And I guess I'm interested both in sort of how you can bring your faith to bear on your work and the job you have, because there are some religious roots, but also how do you look at expanding that so it's not just sectarian, it's wider? Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah, sure. So, yes, historically, YWCA did stand for Young Women's Christian Association. And me and Adam were just having this conversation. And we have now just become sort of the acronym, YWCA. And part of that had to do with becoming more inclusive. And there are some, I will say, associations with Christianity sometimes that gives the feeling that it's not completely inclusive of all people. And so as YWCA is doing the work to eliminate racism, empower women, and the other part of our mission is to promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all, that means that we need to figure out how do we reach everybody. And so for me, with my strong Christian roots, it was a natural, right? It was like, okay, I get to do what I don't call my job a job, it's ministry to me. I'm doing ministry every day. And with that, I really try to embody what I believe Christ means when he's talking about loving your neighbor as thyself, meaning my job is to love.
Mm-hmm.
My job is not to judge. My job is not to give my opinions and thoughts about whatever, but my job is to love. And so I try to display that in different ways in my job, as well as try to get a broader understanding for even myself, right? This world is changing daily, by second, right? And with that, we have people with so many different struggles, so many different experiences, that hopefully the YWCA becomes sort of this place, what I would call sort of a safe haven for anybody that needs us, right? And so that's how I try to operate.
I think folks are generally probably familiar with the YW, but could you just talk a little bit, you have a pretty wide range of programs that you do, and you probably can do this off the top of your head.
Yeah.
What's the range of things that you look over, and how many folks do you serve? What's the size of your staff? Just a little YW 101 would be helpful.
Sure. So we serve in 3 different areas. So I stated our mission. The 3 areas that we exercise our mission are in job, training, and transportation, housing and shelter, and race and gender equity work. And so in those 3 buckets, we have numerous programs in them. Looking at JL. JL's shout out to the YWCA staff. She's our housing director. There are so many housing programs that we have that serve the community. We have a building downtown on the square, which we house about 110 women and children. Also, we have a shelter floor that serves men and children. Some people don't know that. And then we also have programs, what we do in the community in regards to race and gender equity work. So we go into organizations and do something called creating equitable organizations. So if your organization is looking to become more equitable, we will come in, usually it's about a 2 or 3 year contract, and go through a process of what does that look like, creating a change team, going through different things to help the organization become more equitable. We have our Racial Justice Summit we do every year. We have restorative justice work that we do in the schools. So the goal of restorative justice is to interrupt the school to prison pipeline in the work that we're doing. One of the community programs we do with restorative justice is if a student gets a ticket between the ages of 12 and 15, they're able to go through our restorative justice program, and then that ticket gets totally erased and expunged. So we've seen a decrease in some of the disparities when it comes to tickets. And then also in employment, we do job training and transportation. So you've probably seen our vans going around the city. So we pick up folks for work. We're 24/7. Our motto is kind of that we start where Metro stops, meaning we go to outlying areas, some prairie, wherever, and then we also are 24 hours. So we do sexual assault prevention rides. So if anyone is feeling unsafe, they can call a number and we'll come get them. And then also we have something called driver's license recovery program. So if someone, for the reason of not being able to pay their tickets, we can help recover their license by working something out with the courts. Also, we have something called YWeb Career Academy, which is an opportunity, and we've been very successful with that. It's for women and people of color to get into the IT field. And with that, usually we get people that come to us either underemployed or unemployed. And we've had folks that leave us and get a job making $50,000, $60,000. So it's a huge impact for families to get out of poverty. And so that is sort of our charge, is how do we create more programs like that really get people out of poverty and get them to the life that they want to live right here in Madison. So I could keep going, but it's a lot.
But it's a big array. So as you stepped into this role of leadership in the last year and a half, 2 years, what are the lessons you've learned as a leader for yourself? What do you say, oh, I should have done this differently, or this has really worked for me? How have you helped yourself grow as a leader?
Well, let me go back. We do have about 74 employees as well. And we have 2 buildings. There's another building on Park Street that we just moved on Park Street. We're excited about that since last September. So,
And it's like, just a hop across the street to Mount Zion, so it all
boom,
fits together.
there you go. Yep. So lessons learned. Wow, a lot. I think I've definitely had to sort of quickly grow as a leader. Some things that I probably may not have come in with, I've quickly had to learn them. And one of the biggest lessons I think that I've learned is that I have to have people around me that I trust and can trust. Because the work is so challenging at times, you really have to have a team around you that you can trust to do the work with you and that are going in the same direction that you're going. So that's one lesson I've learned. Another lesson is I'm still learning, is taking care of myself. As a leader,
That's a real challenge
it's
for
a
leaders.
challenge, right? And it's kind of interesting because when I would ask other leaders about, well, what do you do for self-care and all this stuff, and people would just start laughing. And I was like, that's not a good sign, right? But it is almost like a joke, I feel like, for leaders. It's like, what is self-care kind of thing? But I don't want to live like that. One thing that I am very aware of, especially for Black women, stress is like one of our number 1 killers. And so I am trying to be very mindful of making sure that I'm taking the time that I need to rest, taking the time that I need to go to the gym, taking the time to get massages, things like that, to make sure that I'm starting to take care of myself and not burning myself out. So those are 2 lessons for sure that I have learned quickly.
And I would suspect music is one of your forms of self-care.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
So you play the bass, but you do this DJ thing. You may be the only.
Yeah, there she is.
There, yeah. You may be the only nonprofit leader who DJs on the side. It's that side hustle thing you were talking about.
Absolutely, and I actually pride myself in that because I tell people I'm probably not your typical CEO, and I do that on purpose, right? Because like I said, I really believe that representation matters. And so I know that there are people watching me. And I want to make sure that if there are young girls, watching me, that they can see that you can be and do anything that you want to do and be who you are doing it, right? I remember early on, someone asked me, they're like, are you going to still DJ? You're the CEO. And I was like, yes, I am. Like, why would I stop? And it hasn't gotten any slower, right? So I still, my mom's my booking agent over there. It has not gotten slower. So I really use music as an outlet. So whether it's I'm playing the bass at church on Sundays or whether it's I'm DJing for a graduation party or Dane Dances or whatever, I have a good time, right? Because that is my release sometimes from a stressful week.
It probably blocks everything else out when you're in the middle of that.
Yeah, I just let it go in that time.
Yeah.
So,
I've got 2 more questions, and then I'd like to have other folks have a chance to ask questions as well. So be thinking about the things you might like to jump in with here. One is, you mentioned early on about your experience with church, and folks in their teens, 20s, 30s today are much less connected with church, particularly within the Black world. The Black church was such an engine of social justice. So what might be done to help connect young people, church, and social justice?
Ask one more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what might be done with this disconnect between young people, and particularly around Black churches? I mean, there are disconnects in white churches too. But that the Black church was such an engine of social justice over the decades. So folks who are engaged in social justice work in the Black community are often not connected with the church. The church is over there. And are there things that might be done to connect those two streams?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that there has been a departure between the 2 groups because I think, as we know in history, the 2 are very connected and linked. I do think that part of it, too, is about educating young people about sort of those roots in the history of that, which I think a lot of times has been lost in terms of You know, a lot of the meetings that were happening during the civil rights movement were happening in the church, right? And so I do think there is an opportunity for understanding that the two go hand in hand, right? And so I would love to see continued work in that vein of trying to figure out how do we connect youth back to the church with that social justice lens. I appreciate my pastor, Marcus Allen, because I do think that he gets that concept and is often from the pulpit talking about real life things that are happening in our country and talking about the challenges and the responsibility that we have as Christians to be able to do something different and change this environment that we're in. And so I don't know the answer. I don't know why, but I do think that there definitely should be a connection of making sure that it comes back.
It's probably worth noting that one of your guitar gigs is down here with Mount Zion's campus service, and so that's one of the kinds of ways that churches are trying to reach out into unconventional ways.
Yeah.
Last thing I've got is your hopes for the Madison community in the coming years, and particularly folks who are in predominantly white churches. What role do those churches and those people have in making those dreams, helping you make those dreams become a reality?
You know, Madison is interesting in the sense that, you know, I have an affinity for Madison, obviously, because I'm born and raised here. But I also, a lot of times, have disappointment with Madison because of some of the challenges that I see here. When you were touted as, you know, the #1 city or the #1 city to raise kids and all this stuff, and I know, I see every day that is not the case. In my work, in my life, it's frustrating. And so for people of color, this is definitely not the #1 place. It would probably be close to 50, right? There is just not, there's sort of this concept of the have and have-nots here, which really, to me, is growing. It's not getting better. And so my dream would be that we figure that out, that opportunities are given. To me, it's about opportunity, just giving people opportunities to be able to change their lives and do something different and to have the opportunity to get their families to a place of stability, right? So for me, my dream of Madison will probably be to see everybody flourishing, just not a certain population. And I would say to, you know, my white counterparts, there's a slide, the last slide I have, if they put it up there. Standing with black women. We are few and far between, I would say, in terms of leadership roles. And I would love to see more of us leading, making decisions, being on boards, leading organizations. And then those of us that are already doing it, support us. And what support looks like is, yes, financially, but it also looks like when we're doing things, join us. We had a speaker at our Racial Justice Summit that I loved. Her name was Bettina Love, and she talked about sort of this concept of allyship that we always talk about, right? This concept of being an ally. But she took it a step further and talked about being a co-conspirator. And I like that, right? Because that means now you're in it with us. Allyship, you can kind of play the game of, you can tiptoe and get in it when you want to, right? And you can step out when you want to and say, okay, I did my part, I'm good. But when you're a co-conspirator, you are joining in the muck, in the mire, in the clay. You're getting in it with us, right? And so I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more disruption happening with my white counterparts. When you know something is not right, say something, do something. Even if it's in your what you think is your small sphere of influence, sometimes it's at your dinner table. Say something. Don't allow the conversation and the narrative to continue that you know isn't right. And so for me, that to me are sort of tangible ways that I feel like our white counterparts can help us in this fight.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So questions you might have. Becca, I think, has a microphone, so she can come around so we can capture this on the video and the audio. But questions you have for Vanessa, we've covered a wide range of topics, so any of those topics are wide open. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. McDowell, for sharing. My question is, besides your role in your leadership role in YWCA and in Mount Zion, of course, you have other roles too in the community with one of the greatest organizations, sororities, in the world.
Write that up. Uh-huh.
And all of that too reflects what you're doing with that. And if you could maybe share some things about that organization that also intertwines with your life.
Sure. So I am a part of the greatest sorority in the world, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and you know that piece of my life in really, you know, Delta Sigma Theta is founded on, you know, social justice. It's also founded on Christian principles. So you have the linking in the meeting of the two, which is who I am as a person too. And so being able to serve our Madison community in different ways through my sorority has also been a blessing. Whether we're going to the Beacon to serve, whether we're at Penn Park doing something for Juneteenth, or doing something, we were just at the polls, adopting a poll to make sure people voted, you know, things like that is also a huge part of my life, and I'm so honored to be a part of that organization and to continue the legacy that my mom has instilled in me, as she's also Delta, and I call my Auntie Carla over there, she's a Delta, and then my line sister there is a Delta. So I have a few Deltas, Connie over there, a few Deltas in the room.
Good thing the Deltas have your back here.
They have my back everywhere. And that's the other good thing about it, too, is it's about sisterhood. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. They definitely do have my back. And so something happens, I'll say, I just call up Deltas. They got my back. So I appreciate Delta Sigma Theta.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
It's so nice to know that you are here and to just learn about a sister in the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. I also have songs, hymns from my youth that just kind of still grab me. Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious to hear if you could just name 2 or 3 or more of the ones that you just love.
Sure, that's a good question. One of my favorite hymns is it just left me. It's coming. This was supposed to be an easy. I know, and then you just hit me, and I just was like, I just totally lost it. But there's something about no turning back. So no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus, right? No turning back, no turning back. That has been one of my favorite hymns for a long time from my childhood, right? Because it's the best decision I made in my life, right? Is to follow Jesus, and there is no turning back, you know? So for me, that's one. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow, right? So that helps me through when it's tough. Because he lives, you know what? I can show up another day. You know, even though I want to throw in the towel, want to give up, but because he lives, I can face tomorrow. That was also another hymn that got us through a difficult time when one of our young people in the community had committed suicide. And I remember that song coming up in my spirit as I was trying to minister to some young people about then, you know, because what happens sometimes is that kids start thinking about their lives and whether they want to take their own lives, right? Because their friend did. But I had to keep encouraging them that because he lives, you can face tomorrow. You know, all fear is gone because I know who holds the future, right? So those would be two that I think I live by.
Great. I'm glad you remembered.
Yeah, came right in it. Thank you, Holy Spirit, right?
I thought your comments on trying to engage faith communities and the difference between being allies and co-conspirators, I'm kind of wondering about the mechanisms for delivering that message and how to get, other churches in our community to at least chew on that idea. I think the church I belong to does a lot of ally stuff, but I don't know if they think much about being a co-conspirator, and I don't know how you plant that seed or whether there are mechanisms to engage the faith community in that conversation.
I think you start by changing the narrative. So even by you having conversations and saying, we've been talking about allyship a lot. What about, let's talk about what it means to be a co-conspirator. I think having opportunities to have conversations and dialogue about what things mean, I think is important because a lot of times we're operating on different definitions of things and not really sure what we mean by things. So I think part of it is how do we bring the faith community together to have these conversations and having different presenters come and talk about what that means. It could be me, it could be, the YWCA has definitely staff that can come do that, as well as the faith community of, churches having conversations. I think what I'm doing within our organization is something called Brown Bag Lunches. It's a brown bag lunch series that are fish bowls. And I started this because I wanted to change the culture, the internal culture of YWCA. So what we do once a month is we have a group that we center, a group of staff that we center. So I wanted to center voices of color in the organization, so I started with black men. So the staff that are black men, that identify as black men, they were in the middle of the fishbowl in a circle having a conversation. The rest of the staff is on the outside in a circle listening. And, some of the questions and leads are, what has been your experience as a black male in this organization? What has been your experience as a black male in Madison? Things like that to get the conversation going, right? And we centered black women. So that last picture that was just up there, that was the black woman fishbowl that we did. And then we've done the Latinx community staff, as well as LGBTQ staff, and getting ready to do something with abilities next time. And so really honing in on what are these things and what are the struggles that certain groups are having and experiences. But it allows the rest of the staff to hear the struggle, and then also for then challenging what we do after the fishbowl is we break off into affinity groups. And so we may have white women, white men, black women, or women of color, and men of color, something like that. And we have a discussion about what did we hear? What did we just hear? And what can we do differently when it comes to our relationships with one another? And the power of that has been culture change, right? Is people are actually thinking about what they're doing now. So something simple as in our fishbowl, I talked about in the black community, we're taught when you enter a room, you speak. Say something, right? Hello, you see me, right? And one of my white staff said to me, she said, well, the way I grew up was that you don't speak unless you're spoken to. So right there's a disconnect. So I'm feeling as a woman of color, a black woman, why are you not speaking to me? To me, that means that you don't see me. That means that you are taking away my identity. All these things, right? And my white counterparts, they didn't have any concept of it. They were like, really? And so before you know it, we've had a shift in, now you just don't walk past me in the hallway, you actually speak. Something that seems so small, but the impact of it is huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of things to me are, I guess tangible things that I think can be done in the community. So I'm sort of piloting it within the organization right now, but I do hope to do this largely in the community.
Vanessa, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I came to Madison in 2006, and I remember you as on the worship band and the assistant to the pastor, and then all of a sudden you kind of turn up as the CEO. And why this is intriguing to me is I'm an MBA, and I have learned branding, and so to the preparation of an executive is marketing and self-promotion and so forth, and mentor. But I see this very humble, unassuming woman who is a godly woman working behind the scenes as late as last Saturday at the gospel concert where I'm going out on stage and she is orchestrating things behind the scenes. How has your humility and service enabled you to become who you are as a leader?
That's a good question. I think for me, I'm very conscious of the word. I have studied the word, and the word I try to hide in my heart, right? And so one of the scriptures that always stands out to me, which I always pray, Lord, never let me become someone like this, is that pride comes before a fall. And God gives grace to the humble, right? And so all throughout the Bible, you hear and you see where God honors humility. And so for me, I try to operate my life in that fashion, right? Because I have seen people fall. I've seen people be so prideful, and it is so, for me, just discouraging, to see that. And I really believe that I am a genuine person, an authentic person, right? That what you see is what you get, right? And I believe God has honored my faithfulness. And being faithful, one of my favorite scriptures is, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will make you ruler over many. And for me, that means, God, you have trusted me with something. I better make darn sure that I am a good steward over it. And so I am conscious of that in every little thing that I do. I try to do it as if I'm doing it unto the Lord, which means I do it with excellence. And I believe God honors that. And so you're right. It was sort of this out the blue thing that seems to have happened, but God knew all along that it was going to happen. And so for me, it has been humbling just to walk in the steps that God already planned for me, right? And it's interesting because I'm a person that you can't ask me. I hate that question when they ask you, where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. You know why? Because I try to live my life based on where God is calling me to. So right now, he's called me to be this and do this. So that's what I'm doing. I don't know where he's going to call me in 5 years. So I can't say that. I'm not someone who, which is kind of weird. I don't know. I guess it's kind of weird in the world sense that I'm not someone who plotted my life out to be a CEO. I plotted my life out to obey God. So to me, there's a difference between that and what I would say the world does. Is sometimes it's like you said, you get your MBA, you get this. Let me tell you something. I do not have a master's degree. Most CEOs that you see in this town have some type of master's beyond education. That's God. Do you know what happened before my predecessor? She changed the job description of the CEO before she left. and got rid of the master part. That was God. So that's what I mean when I just operate based on what I feel like God is leading me to do.
I want to just pick up on one piece of that before we go to the next question, which is you bring this sense of humility, which is part of knowing yourself and who you are. And from some of the things you said, you also understand that as a CEO, you have a level of power and example that you get to set for the community, and you don't shy away from that. You don't flaunt it, but I want to be the DJ, so I show young girls, you can do these things. It seems to me you're very conscious of the opportunities this position gives you without it being all about you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of sort of the platform that God put you on, right? And what are you going to do with it? And for me, I never want necessarily people to see me in terms of Vanessa. I want you to see the glory of God. I want you to see the display of God through me, right? So some things that probably you would think, gosh, how does she even do that, right? Sometimes I have no idea. I'm doing all this stuff, right, except for God, right? It's the only explanation. But I try to make sure that wherever I am, I'm conscious of who I'm representing, right? So even when I'm in meetings sometimes, I may seem quiet, and I'm very observant. I'm a very observant person. I'm listening and I'm watching everything that's happening. And until God gives me an unction to say something, I don't say anything. So that could be misread as, oh, she's quiet, she's this, that, and the other. But I'm not one of those people that need to talk to hear myself talk.
Unless you're walking into a room.
You better say something when I walk in, right? There you go. But that's the thing, right? So it's, for me, knowing the platform that I'm on, knowing the example and the responsibility that I have, because to much is given, much is required, I'm conscious of that every day.
Great. Yeah. Another question over here.
Yep.
I grew up in Madison. I was born and raised in Madison.
Okay.
And I went to Central High School,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
which is now defunct. But we went to high school with several black individuals. And this was back in the 50s and 60s when the turmoil was going on down in the South. And we didn't, at least I didn't feel that up here in Madison, Wisconsin. And some of my best friends, for one, Alphonse Studesville, who was a instructor out at Madison College, and his wife. And unfortunately, they were killed. But Al and I sang together in quartet in high school, and I just found him to be the most wonderful person in the world. And so many of the individuals back in the 50s and 60s, I didn't see the segregation as I see it now in the city of Madison. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't around, but no, just kidding. I think that's an interesting point. I mean, it's interesting, even my experience right here, being born and raised here. I do think it's getting worse, right? Because even when I think about my childhood and I think about growing up in Madison, there are always things, right? There are always situations that, occurred, but it didn't seem as bad as it has gotten, right? And, I'm just going to be honest, I do think that I am a believer, which I believe comes from the Word of God, that the leader sets the tone, right? And so I think our current leadership is not setting a tone of togetherness and love either, right? So I do think that we as a sort of nation and even as a community are sort of reaping from what's happening sort of nationally as well. So we're not necessarily singled out. It's just, I do think that things are just getting worse everywhere right now because of the tension that is happening from the top down.
There was a question in the back, I think.
So have you always lived in Madison?
Yes.
Or did you get a chance to leave at any point?
I am one that, I say I was born, raised, and stayed. Mm-hmm.
So you're right, we're not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure in your activities with the Y, you hear lots of different stories from all over the state and the country. But I was just curious if you'd had a chance to leave, but my sense was that you had been a homebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was another question up there.
Brace yourself. I don't have a question. I just like to make a comment. It must have, and hearing you talk about the preparation on how God prepared you, it must have greatly impacted your life. When you were an 8th grader, you were a basketball player with the Creamery school in which I was a referee. You were the only African-American player on the team, or only person of color. And in your high school year, it's my understanding that you were the captain of the track team. And I'm not sure if you were the only person of color on the track team or not. There probably weren't many. I'm sure that those types of experiences, and there have been many more, allowed you to surpass what you would have learned or could have learned as an MBA. I'm sorry, to a Reverend as an MBA. I'm sorry, or any education that you would have gotten from the books. You actually got it through experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And,
absolutely. Yep.
And it's clear. We're not surprised. It's clear. Now, I'm sorry that my wife is not here. Although after your expression on her, not competitors, but another sorority, and she's an AKA. I'm happy that she's not here, but we'll have that discussion later with Carla.
Yeah.
And we actually, our family knew you for the 27 years that we've been here, and we are just, I made this special effort to get here, and we're just so thankful for you, and we thank God for you and your family. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
One more question?
Sure.
Okay.
All the way across.
Hi. First, I just wanted to comment that I'm so glad I'm here. I happened to find on Facebook last night that you were going to be here, and I thought it was meant to be. So thank you so much for sharing your story. So I just was wondering, as far as what you talk about, I think you said do it scared. My thing that I say for what I do is walk through the fear. So give us advice on how you've done that.
Sure. So, I'm someone who I'm not a risk taker necessarily by nature, right? I'm probably more introverted. And so this whole job is doing it scared, right? It's very opposite of what I consider myself in terms of being a homebody, I'm just okay at home by myself, I don't necessarily like speaking in front of crowds of people, things like that. I mean, my family can attest. I go through a thing every time I have to do a speech. I'm like, oh my gosh, But what I have learned is that I always have the image of Peter walking on water when I have those moments. And it's because can you imagine something that's not natural to you, right? And you actually having the courage to get out and do it, get out of the boat. And that's what I hear God saying all the time to me, get out the boat. I have you, I got you. Get out the boat, just get out the boat, right? And so for me, it's always that, every day, get out the boat, You have to do something, when you have to make a huge decision, get out the boat. I have you. As long as you keep your eyes on me, I have you, right? And so that's kind of how I get through my days, to be honest, is I literally, when you're talking about depending on God, I'm literally depending on God every day. I don't think, I am not ego-driven to think that I know the answers to everything, that I know what to do in the moment. I am literally praying, God, asking, God, can you give me wisdom for today? Can you show me what to say and what to do today? Those are my prayers usually as I'm walking up into my job every day. So you're talking about doing it scared or walking, fearlessly. I don't think that I used to try to pray away my fear, but I've learned that I don't need to pray away my fear. I just need to operate in spite of it. Does that make sense? So I'm going to have fear, but I need to trust God enough that he's going to get me through to the other side. So I may be going to the other side scared to death, but I know who's with me. And so if I know that God is with me in something, then I don't have to be afraid. But I have to acknowledge, I do have fear, right? So that's how I get through it.
Seems like a good benediction.
Now unto him.
Thank you so much for sharing your life with us.